Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
Welcome, everyone. John Corcoran here, the host of this show. Every week I get to talk to such amazing CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies and organizations, ranging from YPO, EO, Activation, Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable, Act Software, many more. Go check out some of those past episodes. You will enjoy them. And you know my story. I'm a recovering political hack and a recovering lawyer. Spent years working in politics, including stints at the Clinton White House and California governor, practicing law. But 10 years ago, I discovered this medium of podcasting. I've been doing it ever since. And I love that I get to talk to smart founders and entrepreneurs, and today is no exception. But first, before I get to that, I want to give a quick shout out and thank you to Chris Krimitsos of Podfest Expo, who recommended today's guest, and I'm excited. His name is Brad Stevens. He's a lifetime entrepreneur and CEO of Outsource Access, which is an offshore managed virtual services firm that he built over 200 staff in just 18 months. Pretty impressive, and projected to hit 500 staff in 2021. He's an expert in scaling, automation, outsourcing, high performance virtual teams. He's also a keynote speaker through his firm BST International all around the world. He's shared stages with John Maxwell and Deepak Chopra and advised Martin Luther King III. He speaks primarily on agility and scaling for CEO peer groups. So we're going to ask him all about that. Been heavily involved in Entrepreneurs Organization, EO, and he's currently the president of the Atlanta chapter of EO. And he also has been involved in some philanthropic efforts as well, including launching Virtual Assistants Give Back, a documentary film which was made about his firm. And he was also selected to run a think tank on economic growth at the United Nations headquarters. And he has a new podcast. It's called Automate and Delegate. So you'll have to go check that out as well. Brad, such a pleasure to have you here. And what's I found interesting about you and researching your background is that you had been speaking and teaching and training on delegation and outsourcing for a long time before starting your virtual assistant firm. So kind of like us, I told everyone they should start a podcast long before we had any vested interest at all in others doing that. So take us back to, where was the aha moment? When did you start to realize the value and importance and significance of getting good at delegation outsourcing?
Sure, John. And thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be on. We've had a lot of very esteemed guests, so glad to be numbered among them, and the opportunity. Very humbled by it. Appreciate it. And yeah, I'm super passionate about this topic. Anybody that's seen me speak and discuss it, it's absolutely been a game changer in my personal life. Redefined how I think about scaling and growing a business, and just equips you what I call kind of this magic toolbox of know-how and resources that are affordable and effective that just change the game as an entrepreneur. And for me, you mentioned, I've been a lifetime entrepreneur, and long story short, my prior business, before I launched this business, we manufactured and distributed teeth whitening products all over the world with a partner manufacturer. And we had a product disaster happen. Everybody's had these crises that have occurred, just like COVID has been for a lot of people. But we had a product defect issue. So we had thousands of units that were defective all over the world. And so long story short, cash got tight, had to get super lean. And that's when I had to look to alternative options of how to get things done in the business to save money, get things done fast. So kind of a blend of sort of growth hacking and outsourcing and automate and delegating. I kind of learned this craft that has led me to what I've launched today. So we were able to kind of save that business at that time by building a team of gig economy workers all over the world and doing some pretty crafty, creative things. And so when I ended up exiting that business, I had this knowledge base. And so, as you mentioned, it started off with first, I wanted to help and spread the message. So I did a lot of speaking initially, and still do a lot of speaking now, but then didn't have kind of a business connected with it, except we would do consulting. So it'd kind of help companies understand, do these deep dive assessments, figure out what their constraint points are, and then introduce them to this whole world of, quote, outsourcing, which is for most small to medium business, they think that's something for large companies. They don't realize that it can, be accessible to them as well. And how to use, skill-based outsourcing for one-off things like websites and graphic design and data scraping and meet graphic, videos, to actually having a full-time staff in your business that works in somewhere like the Philippines, where our operation is based, that completely can change the game and how they grow. And after doing it for a number of years, I just realized that there was a gap in the market that I felt I could kind of do things differently. And so instead of referring people, I decided to launch my own operation. And so that's Outsource Access, based on my experience with a woman, J-Cell, that I brought on as my very first VA in the Philippines, and just was blown away. And once I learned the difference of English is their first language, their second language, incredibly competent, very driven workforce, but also very affordable in terms of the strength of the US dollar, I decided to launch. So yeah, June of 2019, we launched Outsource Access. And actually, funny enough, 20 months later, 2 months to it, we're actually just hit 277 staff. So it's been a crazy scale growth experience, but just changing the lives of business owners and changing the lives of our staff and employees in the Philippines. We have a very unique way we go about building our business and our culture. So that's kind of led us to where we are today.
So I want to ask you all about the current business, but first take me back to, you mentioned the low point with the previous business, the teeth whitening business.
Yeah.
What was the low point where you feel, you're looking back now, you realize this is you flat on the ground on your back?
Yeah, it was, I mentioned the product issue that we had. So we had to give the detail behind it. It's a teeth whitening pen that we had that had teeth whitening gel on one side and lip gloss on the other. And we had a very high-end manufacturer that we worked with out of Taiwan that manufactured the components for it. And women loved it, because it had the teeth whitening gel they could brush on their teeth to whiten their teeth. Lip gloss on the other had little mini LED lights in it, so they could shift a light. It actually served as a little flashlight in their purse. And it was really, an effective product. And so we had done thousands and thousands of units and had seen success. But on our next batch that we ordered from our manufacturer, somewhere down the line, somebody changed the bioadhesive glue that held the little brush piece on the teeth whitening gel side. And so the way our manufacturing worked was the components were manufactured in Taiwan, and they would ship to the States, where our teeth whitening gel manufacturer would put the whitening gel side in where that little brush was and then put the cap on it. Well, because that supplier changed that bioadhesive glue, it was still safe from a bioadhesive standpoint, but they didn't realize that there was a component in it that had it react to that teeth whitening gel, the hydrogen peroxide. So what happened is it wouldn't happen immediately, but after they filled the teeth whitening gel and put the cap on it and we started shipping these things out, it would start building up gas. And then when people would go to open it, two things would happen actually. It would build up enough gas that the thing would just crack and just ooze inside the box. And that would ooze all over the shelves of our clients. It would ooze all over the purse of one of our clients. Or it would build up enough gas where it wouldn't crack. But when you go to open it, and John, it would literally shoot across the room. I mean, it could almost like crack glass.
Geez.
So basically we sent—
I'm sorry to laugh. You got to laugh now, years later, hopefully. Oh, well,
it's like they say about COVID, you never waste a good crisis. But it was that, talk about a moment when I saw that happening and we couldn't control it. We had these batches going out we were shipping in 18 countries internationally. So basically I sent thousands and thousands of little mini grenades all over the world. And I had to deal with recall issues and replacing, purses and so forth, internationally. And just, fortunately our manufacturer agreed to provide replacements for all that stuff. But I mean,
how much did it cost you? How much did it cost you?
Oh, tens and tens of thousands of dollars. If you look at not only direct costs of replacement, easily over 100 grand plus. It was substantial with having to replace product, but also this is the batch that we sent to all the major beauty editors, all the major publications, because we got enough traction with it. Like, well, you know what? Let's go get this to all the major editors and let this be the batch that they can do write up on us. Because we were thinking about maybe even making a separate entity just for this one product because it was so successful. We found a way to like custom engrave practices names on it so they could use it as a giveaway product. So of course that was the batch that got into the hands of all these people that now had this experience with it. And instead of creating positive press, created negative. So if you look at hard cost replacement plus opportunity cost that it cost us and lost opportunities, I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
What had you gotten it up to? What was it at its peak in terms of employees or revenue or products, number of units sold before this hit?
I mean, we'd done, I think 40 or 50,000 units of the product. In that business, we had about close to 30 employees.
All in the States?
Yeah, that was all a stateside operation. We had contract manufacturers we worked with in other countries for components to it. But
so the business didn't fail, but it didn't fail because you found a way to make it leaner.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, that was a big disaster we had, and so it was being able to use the gig economy and learn how to, because my marketing director had always wanted to do all these different projects. I'm like, man, we just can't from a budget standpoint. And back in the day, it was platforms like Elance and Odesk that you could find these gig economy workers. And most people had read Tim Ferriss, Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week, 10, 12 years prior. But it was still this novelty of like, how do you actually use these resources? How do you actually use them in your business? What can they do? I mean, I realized I could get people to help manage the LinkedIn account of our sales reps. We could do this thing called data scraping. We could data scrape and data mine for pennies on the dollar, incredible, leads. And we could get video editing and graphic design and websites built and all this kind of stuff. I mean, tens of thousands of dollars of what it would have cost me, for hundreds of dollars. So I was able to make dollars stretch and kind of get through that patch, at that time by using these resources.
Got it. And how did you learn these things at the time? Nothing like a good crisis to have to learn some important skills, right? I mean, it's not easy, as you know. It's not easy to manage a virtual team, recruit, hire a virtual team, monitor them. Did you have a mentor or another entrepreneur or founder who guided you through it, or you figured it out along the way?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, it was really kind of figuring out along the way. Like I mentioned, Tim Ferriss' 4-Hour Work Week was about the closest sort of reference book that had been written about this whole, gig economy thing. It's obviously gotten much larger, since this point. It was actually a friend of my wife's that he and I went to dinner one night, and I remember it was the first time that really kind of brought. He had told me he had gotten a website done for his father-in-law's, business, and he showed it to me. He was like, I got this done for like, $500. And I just spent 10 grand paying to get our website kind of overhauled locally. And I was like, are you kidding me? And so I went back that night after dinner. I remember the Mexican restaurant. We were sitting, it was me and him. We had, we were taking, some time together. And I went back and I could not get off. Like Elance was the platform back in the day and I just started clicking and clicking. I spent 5 hours. I was like, this is going to change the game. If I can really harness this and understand it, then there's a lot that went into it. You had to vet people and learn how to communicate. And there's all kinds of things that I learned in the best practices. And that's what I kind of speak on when I do a 90-minute kind of webinar and virtual presentation for groups on it. But was just committed to figuring it out. And part of it was just, I'm a very process-driven individual and detail-oriented. So being able to identify and then kind of create, workflows of how to build this into the business. And part of it's just creativity too. It's just once you kind of learn, you have these tools. Like a wrench doesn't mean anything if it's sitting in the toolbox, but it's like, well, what can I do with this wrench? Well, I can do this and I can do this and I can make this tighter or adjust this. So, learning, for example, like data scraping and data mining, like, finding these resources on these platforms that you go scrape the web and put into a spreadsheet, like incredibly targeted lead partnership opportunities. Well, that's great, but now you have that data. What do you do with it? And so then it was sort of coming up with creative brainstorming ideas of like, okay, well, we have their LinkedIn profile. We have somebody log in under LinkedIn and connect. And then we have their email. We can send an email to them. We can use this creative tool that sends automated handwritten letters. And once we connect with them on LinkedIn and they agree, then we'll log into this, Thankster.com and go send, automated handwritten letters to them now that we know they've engaged with our content. And you could use a VA to do that. So it kind of snowballed. It was just understanding it. And the more I kind of built concepts, and a lot of it's creativity as well, is kind of bringing it together in different ways. That's what I mentioned is kind of a blend of some growth hacking, some outsourcing, some automation, some delegation, some free or cheap tech tools, and how you can kind of blend it together to just do some really cost-effective things.
Any big mistakes that happened along the way, or regrets or challenges as you were teaching this to yourself?
Yeah, I mean, and I had kind of at that company at the time, I had my marketing director and some support team that we were kind of going through this. I mean, I brought it to the table and we kind of got into it together. But I mean, something I've continued to learn is just the vetting process. Is just setting a high bar for people that you're going to work with in using for these different projects, and then how to communicate with them. Those are some of the failure points we had. Is maybe others have had as you go trying to identify somebody to do it, and then I heard the story a million times. Well, by the amount of time I had to spend explaining to them what to do, I could have done it myself, right?
You hear that all the time, yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of entrepreneurs are not the most patient when it comes to detail or communication. But learn how to use tools like Screencast-O-Matic and Loom that allows us to do screencasting, that we could record our screen, our voice, and our mouse and send it over. And it just eliminated so much of the failure points in communication, both initially on the project, but then also what I found is it taught us how we could attract better talent. Because you got to understand, these people in the gig economy world, they can see a mile away somebody that doesn't know how to communicate with a virtual worker, and they live and die by their reputation on these platforms. So like, nope, John's gonna be a bad communicator. He's gonna expect way too much. He's not gonna communicate well with me. And he's gonna give me a poor rating, and it's gonna give me no future jobs on this platform. So by using the right kind of tools, you not only get a better product, but experience, but you attract better talent, as well. So I think that's the biggest thing I kind of learned. And what kind of led to the business I'm in now is the other challenge is we had all these like individual skill-based people that between myself and my marketing director, we had 50, 60 people we were individually trying to manage, right? Somebody that did video editing, somebody that did graphic design, somebody that would do LinkedIn, somebody that would do data scraping. And we were having to kind of quarterback all that. And so I said, what if I wanted a full-time person to work with me side by side to do nothing but manage those resources? And that's what I kind of learned after when I kind of got into this business. And that's when I ran across the Philippines, is this concept of, having a virtual staff, a virtual assistant that can actually work side by side with you as a part of your company and your team, even though they're on the other side of the world, that can do a ton of work directly themselves with a lot of skill sets, but then they can manage all those specialized resources. They can find them, they can manage them, and so forth. So when I learned that about getting a virtual staff to plug in and kind of be a quarterback over those resources, it took our game up to a whole nother place.
Why the Philippines? It has a great reputation for outsourcing, but you mentioned it briefly earlier.
Yeah, so actually, good segue from that comment. So when I realized I wanted to find somebody that could work side by side, not somebody off of one of the gig economy platforms like Fiverr and Upwork and so forth, and we post on a job board and I'd been hearing, when I decided I wanted to have a full-time kind of person working side by side with me, I kept hearing about the Philippines. And when I really started investigating it, and I ended up visiting there and visiting 20 facilities over a course of several days, is that people don't realize that the U.S. controlled the Philippines up until like 1947. So it has completely Americanized culture. English is their second language. They have American education system there. You walk down the street and there's, Outback Steakhouse. So they get our culture. So there's not as much of a culture gap, which is really important. If you're getting somebody to just do a one-off logo, right, or a website development, the culture breach isn't as big of an issue. But when you're having somebody to work side by side and to manage your email, to do personal projects, to do LinkedIn management, you need less of a culture gap. And so with the Philippines found that you get very competent, sharp individuals, American education, English speaking, but it's still, from an economic standpoint, minimum wage is still $1 US over there. So the US dollar has a lot of strength. And so you can get very, very talented, sharp people, for a fraction cost standpoint. And you can pay them 4, 5, 6 times what their minimum wage is, the equivalent of making, $25, $30 an hour in the US, with somebody that has a 4-year college degree, very sharp and bright. And so it creates a win-win, situation. So once I visited there, it kind of made all the difference. And I got my very first VA, and I hired this young woman at 23 years old who didn't have a ton of experience being a VA, but she was very sharp, bright. She had worked for another company. And I was just blown away of her passion to learn, to educate herself, to understand, absorb my business, hired her and brought her on full time. It was crazy. Then I added a second, a third. And funny enough, that 23-year-old girl now is now my chief operating officer of over 275 employees, several years later.
Wow. And
her ability and competency to grow and performs at an incredible, incredible level. So it just showed me the capacity. If you you set the right bar over there and the right people and do the right assessments, you can get that kind of talent pretty consistently.
Now, I think maybe it's because of my background as a recovering lawyer, but I always think of worst case scenario. And I think, how do you diversify your risk, prevent anything from happening? And the Philippines for a long time was plagued by monsoons and technical snafus. It seems like in recent years, some of those have been taken advantage. It seems like they don't have as many hiccups as they used to, but I don't know if that's just my personal experience. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, that was what's really eye-opening that I saw when I went and visited over there, and just seeing and visiting, 20 plus facilities over the course of 4 or 5 days. I went on a very intense kind of tour. And people actually on our website, outsourceaccess.com, you can actually see that documentary film of kind of, I took our team over there, but it was just amazing to see the technology, the infrastructure, because a lot of large corporations have been using the Philippines as call centers because it has such a small language gap, right? For years. But now it's starting to get more visibility, and more small to medium businesses are kind of engaging and going down that path. So the technical infrastructure, I mean, there's still a lot of areas that aren't as developed, but there's been a huge double down in what's called the BPO, the business process outsourcing industry, over there from a technology standpoint. And weather-wise, I mean, there's still definitely the monsoons. I mean, actually, a couple of weeks ago there was one. I mean, we actually chose for the base of our operations to kind of be in an area that doesn't have as much direct hit experience, a lot of times. So you're still going to have the weather issues, and things are going to happen from time to time, but they've built infrastructure and redundancy in that's really helped, mitigate, any kind of losses that happen from that.
Yeah. What has been like, this is such a different business from your last business, but what has it been like? What personal challenges have you had to overcome in building such a fast scaling operation? 270 plus people in 20 months is insane.
John, it comes down to, the old age of Jim Collins talks about, right people, right seats. It's been about finding the right kind of people, because I mean, crazy enough, on top of all the rapid growth, I haven't been able to physically be there during that journey, or normally I'd be making several trips over there. But after my very first trip there that I went, decided to launch this operation, I haven't been able to go back. COVID hit. I was supposed to go for, several weeks back in March, April, as we were going to be, getting into a new office facility and so forth, which we decided to pause on, have everybody's working virtual, which actually worked out way better. But so I've had to really double down on the right people, the proper leadership, conveying my passion and care as a leader, and kind of driving the organization and attracting the right kind of people. So, our biggest challenges of just, because we had pretty high growth, was operationally kind of keeping up with the talent requirements that we were bringing on with our clients. Because we provide all we do is full-time, and it's a fully managed VA experience. And part of what the differentiator we bring in the market is providing layers of managers and infrastructure. And we have over 200 specialized people that support the VAs, which is very different than anything anybody's done in the market. So it was just getting the core team built of senior managers and getting that in place. And then, just all the processes and the workflows, which we're still continuing to refine to this day, to attract talent and get the right people in, do the proper assessments to make sure they're going to be a right fit, to get them paired up, with clients. So the challenge hasn't been demand, because I've been a pretty big thought leader in this space and create a lot of awareness. And frankly, because we have been delivering a really good experience, I mean, we have tons of referrals. I mean, once an entrepreneur experiences that, they want to share it with other entrepreneurs. They're like, hey, somebody actually got this outsourcing thing right. This company's amazing, and how they deliver. So we've been fortunate to get a lot of demand. So our side has just been building the operations, the infrastructure, to make sure we're delivering. So I'm fanatical about EOS, Traction, Entrepreneurial Operating System. I actually hired an EO member, Entrepreneurs Organization I'm a member of. One of the beauties of that is I was able to tap out internationally and got a Philippines member that did EOS implementation for us. It's been amazing for our senior management team. I use components of 4 disciplines of execution as part of that to kind of keep us on track with our quarterly goals. We do our level 10 meetings. Actually just had one before our call today. My whole team in the Philippines right up on Zoom, and we go through and do our 90-minute level 10 meetings, quarterly goals, how we're going about executing it with my senior senior managers and HR, operations, finance. And one of the most powerful things is our EOS implementer had us all read Jim Collins' Good to Great together. And I'm the first guy. I mean, from a male standpoint, I'm the first guy to stop and ask for directions if I'm lost. Like, I don't need to have an ego that says I need to go bang my head against the wall. Like, if there's a framework or a process to follow that's been proven, I'd rather, use it so I can use my creative ability on building what we're building. And so we read Good to Great. And a lot of people, they're like, oh yeah, Good to Great, it's a good one. But if I ask them, well, what were the key principles? A lot of them don't remember, right? They all just know it was a good business book and, oh yeah, no, it's a great one. But they really don't. And that was me as well. I mean, I read it, I think back in my late 20s and I remember, Jim Collins, he's great, but nobody really, most people don't know what the principles are and use them. I became such a fanatical student of Jim Collins and asking us to read it together as a management team. And it was like I read it again for the first time. And I'm like, this is the blueprint of how to build a phenomenal organization. So I doubled down on those principles, and it's part of what we used. Actually, our core values spell great, GREAT, because of so connected to it. And I use the vocabulary and bring the concepts to the table on level 5 leadership, right people, right seats, first bullets and cannonballs, all the key concepts across all of his key books has been a huge part. So, the challenges have been operations, leadership, managing, virtual leadership. So I've tried to double down on existing frameworks and processes like EOS, like Good to Great, like 4 Disciplines of Execution, like John Maxwell, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, and try to really use those frameworks to kind of guide our process. And so far I've been very fortunate. It's worked and it's brought the right people to us, which is where it starts, that have been a part of the organization.
One of the things that I think is so interesting about entrepreneurship is you have to work yourself on improving your own skills as you improve the skills of those around you. And personally, that's something that I see for me in the next year and years ahead, that there are going to be certain skills that I've never worked on before that I need to work on. For you, what skills do you think those are that you need to work on in the year or years ahead?
Just thinking bigger, and thinking bigger and bigger, I think is, as entrepreneurs, I mean, my businesses, I haven't had one to this size as of yet. And I think you can kind of allow yourself to be molded mentally to sort of this one size, and making the mental leap of like, no, we can be 500, we can be 2,000. I mean, our goal actually in the next 4 years is to get to 3,000 people. And that's a big concept to think about, especially something on the other side of the world. But I think, thinking bigger as a leader and shifting, for those of you who are familiar with EOS, really owning that visionary, type of role, and continuing to extract myself from operations and day to day. And there's this thing I call the 85% rule. It's like, look, if somebody else can do it and can get 85% of what I would do and it gets done, then it's a win. I'd rather get 5x more done at 85% than 1x done at 100% of what I can do. So I think owning that role and thinking bigger, and just mentally the appetite and desire to kind of get to that size, and just developing as a leader, overall, culture is a huge part of what's made us successful. I mean, we had to set up a whole corporation in the Philippines and go through that infrastructure. But I think, ironically enough, a lot of people see the CEO side as, you don't get into the day-to-day, which is true operationally. But I'd say one of the most powerful things that I do that I learned from reading an article, Frank Blake that turned around Home Depot, he talks about one of the most powerful things he did was write 100 handwritten letters per week to frontline staff. And that rippled through the culture of that organization. It's like Peter Drucker says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can have all the strategy in the world, but getting the thing right, treating people right, them super passionate about your organization. And so actually, I still write personal handwritten messages, had to do it via chat, to all of our VAs that join our organization, how we're committed to their personal development, their growth. And you wouldn't believe how much that ripples through our organization. So my growth areas is just stepping into bigger thinking as far as our size and what we're capable of, kind of breaking outside of my fishbowl to the current size that I'm at from a standpoint. And then and doubling down on culture and continually being the cheerleader, from a visionary and from a culture standpoint, moving ahead.
An organization that really helps with that, which you mentioned, is EO. So what role has EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, what role has that played for you over the years and now?
It's been a centerpiece, of my entrepreneurial development, my personal development as a husband, a father. I mean, I just can't say enough about, EO. Unlike some other organizations that are out there, I mean, it's a volunteer run organization. I'm on the board, the president this year, and probably put in about as much time with that as my business and don't get paid for it. But that's driven by the passion for the organization. I mean, it's 15,000 entrepreneurs globally, 190 chapters all over the world. I've had a chance to speak for 50 or 60 of the chapters myself, so I got a chance to know a lot of members. You meet in monthly forums. You have 7 or 8 entrepreneurs you meet with for 4 hours per month. And it's your board of advisors, and none of you are in the same industry. So you can offer blind spots and insights from people that aren't as close in the weeds as your industry. From a business standpoint, also from a personal. I mean, I'd say a great deal as an entrepreneur. It intersects your personal life a great deal, as a father, as a husband, spouse. So it's just helped elevate me to a whole nother place by having that forum I meet with monthly. We have 30 plus speakers and events throughout the year, incredible speakers. I mean, in the last month, we had Usain Bolt to Gary Vaynerchuk that came to speak for the organization. They just continue to inspire and stepping into leadership roles, being president of the chapter this year. And I'm actually going to be a regional director on the East Coast for next year. It just, when you surround yourself by fellow entrepreneurs and those that are entrepreneurs know that, a lot of times your friends or family can't quite relate. Having that peer group around you to be there in the low times, like when you have teeth whitening pins blowing up all over the world and how you're going to get to the other side. But also to be there to support you in your growth. And particularly during COVID, it's been an amazing resource and collection of people, both within our own chapter, but now, we have a global Slack channel for all of the members. I mean, there's over 10,000 members globally that I can go on there. If I needed, like I was dealing with trying to get a new bank in the Philippines when we were incorporating over there, post it. And within 2 seconds, I've got 15 responses back from people in different parts of the world. Or, I was looking for an EOS implementer, posted it, immediately found someone in the Philippines. So it's connected us in a global way that's been, tremendous. So can't say enough about EO and what it's been specifically for, entrepreneurial support.
Yeah, and I think they've done an amazing textbook job this past year with COVID and everything, and how to respond and how to support your members. We're running a little short on time, so I want to wrap up the 2 questions I always ask. I'm a big fan of gratitude. So as you look around at other peers, perhaps forum mates, other EOers, other entrepreneurs, other founders, other people in your industry, who do you respect? Who do you admire who's out there doing good work?
Yeah, if I look around, within the EO community, I'd say, there's an entrepreneur in Atlanta, David Cummings, that's really well known. That he took Pardot and sold off to Salesforce, and he built a huge entrepreneurial community in Atlanta with Atlanta Tech Village. He's actually one of the first people I met when I joined EO for Atlanta, and just a phenomenal entrepreneur. He's very simple, not super complex in his approach and ideas and concepts. Very easy to understand. Not simple in terms of competency, but just simple. The simplest things are always the best. And so he's just had a very steady approach to how he's built his companies, and has had a give back component, to what he does. So David Cummings has been a tremendous mentor. And within I have to say collectively, my forum with an EO, I've been an EO for 8 years now, and just the individuals that have been a part of that journey, from Matt Granados and Kenji Kuramoto and Christian Dotter and Alan Bray and John Austinson. All the people that have been a part of that journey. Philip Gosling, who joined recently for us. Just phenomenal entrepreneurs who are committed to growing their businesses, but also being great fathers and women I've had a chance to meet with, being great mothers and spouses. And so collectively, my forum has been just an incredible, resource. And, I think you got coming up soon here, Warren Rustand is probably one of the most standout speakers I've ever heard in EO. His name comes up a lot, and highly recommend anybody get a chance to see his content. He got a book that just came out recently, but just a tremendous leader, and just the grace in which he has led organizations, and also his family, and how he's built an amazing family dynamic and experience has been tremendous to observe as well. So top of mind, those are some quick ones that I reference.
Excellent. All right. And looking a little bit further back in your past, so let's pretend we're at an awards banquet, maybe like the Oscars, the Emmys. The Golden Globes have just happened. If you were to look backwards, who are the people along the way who you would acknowledge if you're receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award? Who would you would acknowledge? Family and friends, of course, but are there mentors, coaches? Are there teachers? Anyone like that?
Sure. I mean, I know it's cliche, I'm sure, for everyone to reference, parents in the journey, but I, being an entrepreneur, I grew up in an entrepreneurial type of, family environment. And, it was my dad, talking to me about business, driving back and forth to school, that had me launch my first business in third grade, where I sold micro machines, or rented micro machines, back and forth, that was an influence and led me to kind of launch a tutoring business in high school. So just hearing that advice and guidance. And then, my mom actually was one of my very first employees for my very first company. I mean, she sat side by side with me that I launched in their house after the first company I was supposed to work for after I graduated from college went under. And so I had a chance to start my entrepreneurial career. And there my mom was right beside me, and my grandmother and my aunt, in a room about 10 by 10, all on the phones, helping me launch this pharmaceutical support business for the elderly. So they, as an entrepreneur, they truly have been in the trenches and side by side with me, to help kind of be supportive and literally financially and with their time be there to help me in the journey. So can't say enough, about that experience.
That's great. Go ahead.
And the last I'd say, I mean, that's kind of been existed in my past and coming forward, as I talked about, was Jim Collins. I just encourage anybody that's read his books or partially just to revisit. As I mentioned, it's something I read back in my 20s, late 20s, and just rereading it again through my management team it truly is the blueprint of how to run a business. And he came out with a book. It's a very short one called Turning the Flywheel. And in that one, it's only about an hour and a half listen if you do audiobook, but he ties together all the concepts from his books, Good to Great, Great by Choice, Built to Last, How the Mighty Fall. He ties it all up in about an hour and a half one. And if you go to his website, jimcollins.com, and you click on concepts, he's got a little video there that ties all the concepts. Because everybody kept asking, hey, Jim, put a bow on it for us. Get all these kind of books and so forth. And so I'm actually taking my board right now for EO Atlanta, through a 4-month curriculum of going through that. But just even if you've read it, revisit that and check out Turning the Flywheel. Ties it all together in a really nice consolidated piece.
Excellent. I'm going to check that out. Well, Brad, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. OutsourceAccess.com and Automate and Delegate is the name of the podcast. Where else can people connect with you or learn more about you?
Sure. Yeah, I'll show some of the websites. And one thing we've set up, for all the speaking and stuff that I do, is if listeners will just send an email to just tools, TOOLS @outsourceaccess.com. And all they need to do is just put, rise in the subject line. So we'll kind of know where it came from. That's all they need to do. Don't need to send a message. Just send an email to that, hit send. And we'll send you a list of over 200 tools that are Automate and Delegate technology tools. I'll send you, links to some of the recordings of webinars and content that I've done. We get great feedback from it. So they can send an email to tools@outsourceaccess.com, put rise in the subject line. And that's all you do is hit send, and we'll kick off and send you some key content. But otherwise, outsourceaccess.com, speaking, bradstevenstraining.com. If anybody's interested in having me speak for organizations, do tons of case studies and dive into this whole journey. And certainly on LinkedIn and Facebook, you can kind of look me up personally or Outsource Access and find us there.
Excellent. All right. Thanks so much, Brad.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
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 And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.